So we just some logistics and agreements to go over. We are recording and live streaming. Please share your name, pronouns, and location in the chat. Uh, we should have already enabled closed captioning, but if not, can we have someone do that? Um, and there are no dumb questions. This is a space for us to learn together. There are a bunch of PWN staff members that are going to be monitoring the chat. So go ahead and put questions in there as they come up, and we'll address them and keep track of them. So this web session is called Storytelling for Advocacy, and we have three objectives for the session. The first is to learn how to effectively and authentically tell your story. The second is to learn how to connect your story to a clear ask. And the third is to learn healthy boundaries and autonomy in storytelling. Just a quick note, we will be kicking any autopilots or AI transcribing bots. This is just part of our policies around privacy and not recording people without their consent. And now I'm going to hand it over to our amazing presenters to introduce themselves. Johnny, if you want to go first.
Wonderful. So excited. Thank you so much, by the way, Maya, for that introduction. And thank PWN for, of course, inviting us to be part of this session. My name is Johnnie Kornegay. I am the Director of Strategy and Impact for CNP. You may also hear CNP as the Counter Narrative Project. In my role, I'm responsible for like visioning and planning for the organization. And of all the things that fall within that, one of them is our creative and our visual representation. And I do that because when I'm not doing my work with CNP, I am a photographer and I am a podcaster. So I am also a storyteller and often am using storytelling as a way to advocate. So excited to be here.
And I can go ahead and introduce myself as well. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Siciliano. I have the pleasure to have met a lot of you virtually and some even in person. I use she, they, pronouns, and I am PWN's communications director. I've been at Positive Women's Network for 2 years, and before that, I have done other communications work in the immigrants' rights field, um, and have just been, lots of have been a part of lots of movements that have to do heavily with storytelling. And so I'm super, super excited to get a chance to share some of that experience with you all today.
Thank you so much, Johnny and Victoria. We're going to jump right into Johnny's portion of the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am going to set my timer to make sure that I stay on time. I'm going to do my best, y'all. I'm going to let you know to not look at the chat because what will happen with me is I will look at the chat, see things coming through, and want to respond immediately. But I do have several things that I want to share. And there will be moments when I will ask some questions of folks, and we'll look at the chat then. And if I see some questions to respond to immediately, I will jump in and do that. But I just want to once again say thank you. On behalf of CNP, we are always grateful to work with PWN in all the work that we do. So it's always good to be here in the space. So as I told you, I am a storyteller and have spent so much of my life storytelling in a lot of different ways. And I get to do that in my work with CNP. And the way I'm going to start this presentation is I do want to tell everyone a bit about CNP first, because I think understanding that will help you to understand how storytelling is kind of a thread that flows through all of our work. Okay. So, first and foremost, you can read our mission and values there. But I want to share a bit about who we are. So, first and foremost, I think the first important thing to understand about CNP is that we are an organization that stands in solidarity with all movements for racial and social justice. And we're an organization that is committed to advancing Black LGBTQIA plus acceptance. We are an organization that works in coalition and in solidarity with a number of organizations, and it's just core to our work. We are a narrative change organization. We stand in the tradition of names that you may know, names like Bayard Rustin, James Baldwin, Essex Hemphill, Audre Lorde, and other movement leaders, artists, organizers, activists, visionaries that are committed to countering narratives and speaking truth to power. That is our work, and that is the tradition that we stand in. Next slide, please. Awesome. So, sharing a bit about what that means for our work. So, our theory of change is that we shift narratives first by producing original content. I'll tell you why that's really important in a moment, but we do that in many different ways. So we do that as far as digital storytelling is concerned. So if you visit our social media, you will see plenty of examples of the way we do that in the digital space. We do that through video. We have an active YouTube channel. If you visit YouTube and search for CNP Tribe, you will find The Reckoning, which is our digital platform. So we produce articles and various written content about the Black LGBTQIA plus community on our digital platform. So you can visit thereckoningmag.com. And that is where CNP publishes all of our written content, but we also have our video content there in addition to YouTube. And we also have our podcast content there. And we're still moving things into The Reckoning too. So there's a lot more things that are coming into that platform. But one of the ways that we shift narratives is by producing original content. The second way that we change narratives is by building capacity of media organizations, storytellers, and other content creators. We've worked with organizations in the past that include folks like Capital B Atlanta, the Atlanta Voice, and also individual content creators. And really this work is to combat anti-LGBTQIA plus and HIV stigma. And we do that through what we call our media roundtable. If you visit our website at thecounternarrative.org, there's a tab there for the Media Roundtable. You can learn more about that work, and you can learn actually who's part of our 2024 cohort in that website as well. And one of the other ways that we change narratives is through training advocates on how to tell their stories. So we have what's called our Narrative Leadership Institute, where we will host different labs where we train advocates on different aspects of storytelling. So we have had courses on documentary filmmaking. We've had courses on podcasting. We have actually an upcoming course on content creation for folks that are interested in the digital space. And we do that work to really, and it's absolutely free for folks who attend, but we will have a series of classes to teach folks about these different types of ways that you can tell stories to advocate. Next slide, please. So the problem that CNP solves, and this is so critical to the work that all of you are doing, right? We believe that bad narratives create bad policies, right? So if narratives are incomplete, not accurate, not inclusive of who we all are, that can lead our policymakers to author and pass bad policies that do not serve our communities, right? So CNP believes in a proliferation of narratives. So many narratives about our communities that speaks to the fullness of who we all are. Okay. And I want to hold that for a second because as we think about why you're here for storytelling for advocacy, that is absolutely critical, right? To be able to use your story to be able to shift narratives and create a much fuller picture of who we all are, right? So, as you are considering how to connect your stories to what you're advocating for, I would absolutely encourage you that, you know, that your story and how you choose to talk about it is one of the key components to change. So I want to repeat that because I think it's really important. Your story and how you choose to talk about it is one of the key components of change. Your story matters. Okay. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So earlier on, remember when I told you that I would tell you why this theory of change is really important, why we create this content? We create original content so that we can be the authors of our own narratives. Okay. If we can control our narrative, we can shape our destiny. Okay. You can take this very statement and apply it to you and your work. That we can easily be changed to you, me. This applies to all of us. And this is one of the ways that CMP does it through our work. We do this because we want to control the narrative and we want to be able to shape our destiny. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk a bit about storytelling and advocacy, and we can move right to the next slide. So, I want to read this quote uh, by Naomi Watanabe, and I'll talk about it a bit. But the quote is, "My story isn't just made up of my singular life experiences. Everyone's tales blend into mine and become part of my story. These tales from others can help us find purpose and bring fullness to our lives if we choose to learn from them. That's why I want to treasure everyone's narratives. These narratives allow us to step outside of ourselves and view our realities with renewed vigor." I think one of the reasons why this is really important to remember is, like I said earlier, um, as this quote highlights, this really connects all of us together, right? In order to create change, it's important that we have a proliferation, as we would say, of narratives, that we have many stories that we tell, because it helps to shape all of the work, all of the ways we see one another, right? And it impacts how our policymakers shift, how our policymakers create, write, and pass laws, right? So it's important to remember this, that your story, my story, we're all connected to one another through these stories. We just have to make sure that we tell them. Okay. We can go to the next slide. So this is likely something that everyone knows, but I wanted to set a baseline for the different types of storytelling. So oral storytelling, as we all know, is the one of the oldest forms of storytelling, right? It's, of course, some people may say it's the oldest, but that idea of someone sitting you down and telling you a story, right? Is very important. And it's an important way to share stories. There's, of course, written storytelling. So as long as we've had the written word, we've had written stories, right? Visual storytelling. I mentioned that I was a photographer. So I use photography as a way to tell stories. And then, of course, there is, especially now, we have digital storytelling. Digital storytelling is unique in that digital can combine a lot of different types of storytelling, So you may end up with oral, written, and visual inside of your digital storytelling, and it becomes its own thing. But I think the question I have for folks here, and you can drop this in the chat. I am going to go to the chat now. What form of storytelling is appeals most to you? What form of storytelling, based on these four, appeals most to you? And hey, Stephanie, thank you so much for, yes, you were part of our lab that we did for creative writing. Hey, wonderful. So I'm seeing,
Yes, it was absolutely amazing. Thank you.
you're so welcome. Thank you. Um, Wonderful. You know what I love about what's happening in the chat right now is I'm seeing so many different types of storytelling, and there's no one right way to do it. That's why we all have to do it in our own way, and it all matters, right? So absolutely love this. All the different types of storytelling that really appeals to folks. Thank you so much for sharing in the chat. So we can go to the next slide. So this slide is our 5 things I, Johnnie Kornegay, am asking you to consider when storytelling for advocacy. Okay. There may be more things that folks can add to this list, but these are the 5 things that I use when I am thinking about advocacy and the way I decide to tell a story. So much like many of you, I use different types of storytelling depending on the story I am trying to tell. And sometimes I might start with one method of storytelling and then it becomes something else, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. But these are the 5 questions that I think are really important when storytelling for advocacy, okay? So the first question you need to ask yourself and have a response to is, what's the goal that you're working towards? Okay. Sometimes that goal is spelled out for you, but sometimes it may be within your community and you're helping to figure out what the goal is. But you do need to understand what the goal is, right? That you're working towards. And by the way, these are in no particular order. Um, the second thing I would encourage folks to consider is, what method of storytelling works best for you. That for you part is incredibly important, okay? It does not, the way you decide to advocate and tell your story doesn't have to look like someone else's method, because it is very specific to you, what you're comfortable with. Some of us are introverts and choose to write. Some folks are much more comfortable oral. All of that is great, but figure out what method of storytelling works best for you, and that may help you to decide how to approach the storytelling that you're doing in terms of the advocacy that you're doing. I will add a caveat. The caveat I will add is, it is also important to uh, exercise the muscle of learning other methods of storytelling. Okay. My method of storytelling mostly started oral, then it moved into photography. And then in about 2021, 2022, I started to write a lot. And these were all skills that I kind of learned along the way, and have slowly began to build some expertise in. So keep that in mind as well. Same thing with digital. I'm going to show you some digital stuff in a moment in my last few minutes. But keep that in mind. What method of storytelling works best for you? Answer the question, why this story and why now? Are you sharing factual information? This is really important. And number 5, like I said, this is in no particular order. What's your ask? So know what the ask is. In fact, that ask might be the first question that you ask yourself because it might drive all the other things. Okay. So these are 5 considerations when storytelling for advocacy. Okay. We can go to the next slide, please. So in our last couple of minutes, I am going to share a few examples of CMP storytelling. We can actually go to the next slide. So we have done storytelling in a lot of different ways with CMP. So we believe, like I said, in a proliferation of narratives. And so we've shared stories in a lot of different ways. One of the ways is, of course, written stories. We've used theater to be able to tell stories. In this particular instance, a high school student in Atlanta had experienced homophobic violence. We wanted to bring awareness to the need for protections for LGBTQIA plus students in school. And so what we decided was to co-produce a stage reading in the community where the harm took place. Now, we don't always know who the people who we're advocating for or the causes that we're advocating for and the people that it's most impacting don't always know, right? A great story that happened with this is I ended up becoming the neighbor of the student who experienced this violence, and through a conversation with this young person's mother, discovered that this was the student and was able to share with the mom that we had done this particular performance 2 years earlier. She, of course, had no idea. She was so grateful and floored that the community supported her son. And I was able to actually give her a poster of what we had done. Okay. So you never know. We can go to the next slide, please. We are going to actually, so I do have a piece of short form video, but because we're getting right at the 20-minute mark, what I will do is share in the chat this piece of video. But more of what I wanted to share here is an example of a piece of short form video in a digital format as a way that folks can be able to tell stories as well. I apologize for the slide not showing up there, but I'll share it in the chat so then folks can take a look at that and we can go to the next slide. Wonderful. And the final example I'm going to show is how we've used visual art to be able to tell stories as well. So that could be through photo shoots that are designed to tell stories. We've actually also partnered with arts organizations, history organizations, and community organizations in a way to be able to tell stories as well in a visual medium. So what you're seeing on the screen up at the top on Second Sunday is a digital exhibit done by the Atlanta History Center in partnership with CMP. And then you're seeing 2 photo shoots there that we've done. So I am right at time. I'm not going anywhere. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. But I will drop the short form video and answer any questions that folks have at the end. And I'll grab some questions too in the chat while I'm here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Johnnie. We have a couple questions in the chat here. The first one I want to flag is from 2 of our policy fellows at PWN. Shakina and Stephanie asked, how do these points relate to a 3-minute elevator speech or a 2-minute testimony?
Yeah.
Types there.
Absolutely. So when you think about the considerations, the 5 considerations for storytelling for advocacy, you want to make sure that for your elevator speech might be different depending on who you're talking to. So when we go back to that elevator speech and we think about, okay, what is your ask and what are your goals? That will help you to, and who are you speaking to? Are you going to be talking to a policymaker in your local community? Are you speaking to a leader of an organization where something might be happening? Are you speaking to some other type of elected official if that's who you're speaking to? So if you know the goal and you know what your ask is, that's how it can help you to develop what your elevator speech is. And so you may have different types of speeches for different types of scenarios, right? But that's where it helps, where that preparation helps, and that those considerations really do help. And I think that can apply to 2 minute as well. Does that answer your question? Absolutely. And I do see in the chat, absolutely research the person you are meeting. Absolutely. So anytime you know that you are planning to, if you're planning to have a conversation or you specifically know that you are planning to go into an environment where you're going to be advocating for a specific issue, you want to have an idea of who you're meeting with, what their role is, and what they can possibly do, right? So that may help you to tweak what the conversation is, right? Is this a person that can actually do something about your ask, right? So I think it will depend on the person that you're meeting with. So yeah.
Thank you, Johnny. And I just want to make a quick correction. It was Shakina and MJ who had asked those questions. And I know specifically MJ's question, which was about testimony, might be related to the fact that MJ just gave some amazing testimony in front of the Colorado House around a harm reduction bill. So yeah, yay, MJ.
Love that. Thank you so much for doing that work, MJ. And yeah, and also what I would recommend, because you are all here together, share the experiences that you've had and what best practices work for you when going into those particular environments, right? That type of sharing and learning from one another is invaluable. So thank you for doing that work, and definitely use this space to learn from each other. Hey, Nikayla, how are you? I I would actually, I don't know if there's anyone from the PWN team that can speak more to how many minutes your testimony should be, but I think that will depend on the environment that you're going into. And I think this particular space is a great place to ask that question. But if there's anyone from the team that has any um general insight, I think this would I would love to hear that as well, if anybody has a specific response for that question.
I can
Yeah.
ask that real quick for you if you don't mind. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, MJ.
Jumping in there. Yeah. I was just gonna say, there's times that I always prepare, they always tell us to prepare 3 minute speeches, but I have learned that I always try to do two because it seems like every time I went up to testify, they change it to 2 minutes before and very shortly before we testify. So to me, it's better to do a 2 minute impactful speech or testimony than a 3 minute rushed testimony.
Thank you for that, MJ. That is super useful. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our second presenter for today, who is Victoria, and she might have more to say on this topic as well.
I do. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited because a lot of the questions are directly related to what I'm about to talk about and building off of what all of the excellent points that Johnny just brought up. So we will definitely get to all this and definitely participate, drop questions in the chat. Yeah, feel free to, we want to make this participatory. So first off, my part's going to be really about just like, okay, you're talking to reporters or legislators or maybe another like constituent and you're sphere that you want to get something from, right? You have an ask. That is the kind of storytelling for that kind of advocacy that I'm really going to focus on today. And so here are some more just kind of like elements to build your story, and they build on each other. So we kind of start with like your backstory. Really think about, even if you're not gonna say every single one of these things, they're very important to consider as you build your narrative. So think about who you are, where you're coming from, how you got to where you are now, is really important. Your guiding beliefs, so like the values that are getting you here, your purpose, and that will be not just like your goals as far as, you know, what your ask is, but what are your goals in general around, you know, the advocacy that you're doing, what you want out of your own, out of your work and for your life, for your neighbors, for your family. That also ties into a vision, an aspiration for the future. And at the tippy top, gotta consider your strategy. So that means you need to align your opportunities, plans, and behavior to kind of fit the situation, which is exactly what we were just talking about. Basically, like if I'm trying to sell Girl Scout cookies, I may need to change up my pitch if I'm going to do it at like a Weight Watchers meeting, right? Like I'm going to say, hey, guess what? We have sugar-free cookies now, etc. You understand. All right, we can go to the next slide. And yes, we can absolutely make the slides available. We will also post the video on YouTube as well. All right, so next up, more things to consider. I believe I saw someone in the chat earlier saying, think about your audience. This is super, super important. These are the groups and individuals whose behaviors you need to change to reach your goal. We touched on this before, and again, you're going to change up, you know, if you're talking to a Democratic representative versus a Republican representative, your tone and the way you talk about things is probably going to change a lot. And also just depending on like where you are and what the context is for you telling your story. If you're talking to reporters, also think through, does the audience of this publication, does it match the audience that you're trying to reach? And if it doesn't, is it even worth your time? A lot of times I have seen folks just get excited to raise awareness, and to be asked to share their story, and will jump on any kind of platform, regardless of whether or not it's actually going to further our cause. And sometimes, depending on what the audience is, it might even be harmful. So that's definitely something to consider. It's always okay to say no. Always, again, going back to your goals, it's crucial to state exactly what you need them to do or how you need them to change. You don't just want to make people aware, right? Awareness is like, okay, it's great. It's kind of the first step. At least they're aware. But then what do you need them to do? Do you need them to vote? Do you need them to join a campaign? Do you need them to sign a petition? Do you need them to influence someone else, go talk to their representatives? Also think through the folks that you're talking to, your audience might have different goals from yours. A reporter, like, what are some goals that a reporter might have? They're not to like share your story and change the world. They're clicks, right? Like they want to do a good job. They want a story that's going to get a lot of reads. So they want it to be entertaining. They want it to be like factual and informative, hopefully. They might have goals that don't necessarily align with yours. And so that's something to keep in mind for your strategy. And finally, but most importantly, ownership. You have ownership of your story. Johnnie brought this up. We'll say it over and over and over again. Ask questions. Anytime somebody is going to have some kind of control over how you get to share your story, whether that be a reporter or if you are working with someone to, share testimony, how you are the owner of your story is the most important thing. You get to decide how much of your story to share, when, how, or to whom. And I want to just like take a little break here, and because I know that so many of you have experience directly with the kinds of issues I'm talking about. And I wonder, does anyone want to talk about an experience that you've had, either with a reporter or a legislator, that just left a bad taste in your mouth, where you just like didn't feel like your story uh, was being treated with respect? Does anyone want to talk about that? We can maybe, I, ooh, LaShonda. Yes, you've gotten so many interviews and told your story so many times.
Yes, ma'am. When I first started out in 2021, I had a day on the Hill in Nashville, and we met with all the senators and representatives and everything. And there was one gentleman that we missed. So me and the lobbyist, we went to go talk to him. And I was telling my story, and he made me feel so disgusted and little, like I didn't matter at all. And after that day, I decided, okay, I'm going to give up advocacy because I'm not going to be talked to like that. But as I listened to more people that's had the same experience, I was able to get back into my work. And that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. I hope I see him next week.
Yes, I hope you do too. I love your story. I hate that that happened to you, but it's so, everyone has had an experience like that, right? Ubiquitous, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's everywhere. Um, Whenever you get folks who are making themselves vulnerable and sharing a part of their lives that maybe was like painful or traumatic, and they're doing that in order to, um, like acquire positive change that is going to make a difference in their own lives, it's so personal. It's so personal. And so what you have to remember is exactly what you did, LaShonda. Is like your story is yours. If somebody is not respecting you, talking to you the way you deserve to be treated, you have the right to remove yourself from that situation.
Correct. But I do want to see him again next month. Well, next week, and ask him, do you remember me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to let him know, you sort of hurt my feelings, but that didn't stop me from doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. We need to bring him, like, send him an email with all of the hundreds, dozens of links with all of your
Right.
storytelling, like all the times that you have been in the news, because you have just done an amazing job sharing your story,
Yes.
and impacting change. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank
And
you.
we can go to the next slide, Maya. All right. So another important thing to keep in mind. What do all these words here have in common? And I'll just kind of pause here and let you think on it. Community, freedom, respect, connection, autonomy. What do all these things have in common? Values. Your values. You want to lead with your values. These are basically things that nobody's going to say, no, respect is bad. Justice is terrible. Like, we might have different ideas and opinions on what justice looks like, or what freedom looks like, or what respect and security look like. But everyone is pretty much gonna agree that, like, that core thing, family, connection, exactly. Yeah, Ruby, you said people in the chat. That's perfect. People, that's what it is. Like, on the inside, these are things that just touch us, right? All of us. And so if you lead from a value, you're not necessarily saying, okay, let's use the example of MHS, right? Molecular HIV surveillance. If you are talking to someone about, oh my gosh, this is going on and it's so bad for all these reasons, blah, blah, and getting really deep into the nitty-gritty of what is being done and why. If you lead with, I did not have a choice. I did not get to opt into this. My autonomy was not considered. My voice was not considered, right? My choice is being taken away. That is something that anyone can understand, regardless of whether, they have anything personally to do with your issue. So always, always lead from a place of values when you are building your message. And you'll see this throughout campaigns. Like, you'll start to notice, for instance, like in reproductive justice, you see like pro-choice being the euphemism for like respecting bodily autonomy and like being pro the women's right to get an abortion, because some people might bristle at like hearing the word abortion, right? Not that they should, but they do. And then but choice. If we get to that, like, who has a problem with people having a choice and having autonomy over their bodies, right? So you'll see that over and over again in like political campaigns and in all kinds of stuff. What values does the health department want to hear? Yeah, the values that are important to you. I absolutely think that anyone who is actually working for you, that is working for the public, has a responsibility to understand and work towards what values are important to you. And again, they're universal. So those are all going to be things that are, important to them as well, right? But we can talk more about that in a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we've got, a value at stake. Why should your audience care? Which is really what we were just talking about, that Z was asking, what values does the health department want to hear? Well, like, what values are at stake? Why would they care, right? And then what is the problem? So think through that. And what is the solution? Because a lot of times what happens is we get this parade of like just things that are terrible happening in the world all the time. We're bombarded with it. We turn on like social media, we turn on the news, and it's just like, oh my gosh, there's all these things. I feel so overwhelmed, like I can't do anything about it. So we can't just be against harms and threats. We have to be for something. We have to be for something positive, and we have to get people to a hopeful place where they know that they are going to be able to take action and start to believe in liberation the way that you do. And in the next slide, if we'll go there, yeah, I have my little social experiment. So I'm telling you, this bear is not pink. And now I'm going to ask you, what color is this bear? Picture it in your mind in color. And is there any way that you can see not pink? Like you can't visualize in the negative, right? Like if you try to think, okay, don't think of like any color but yellow. You're just picturing yellow, right? So that is just an example of how the brain works. If we tell someone, and I used to run into this a lot in doing immigrants' rights work, right? Used to hear a lot of um, folks calling undocumented people illegal. There are all these campaigns around like, no human being is illegal. But what you keep hearing and reinforcing is the word illegal. So if you start to kind of come back and think, okay, well, how do we rephrase that? How do we say that in a positive, not in like a double negative way, right? But okay, like how about undocumented and unafraid, right? Like this is something that we're going to change that message. We're going to change that narrative, not so that we just say whatever they're saying, not that, but we also have our own message. Does that make sense? You see tints of pink. I love it. Yeah, it's so hard. How can you not see it, right? I'm just like, okay, I am gonna pick a number from 1 to 10. It's not 7. What number do you see in your head? 7, right? All right, and we can go to the next slide. Okay. So here are just a couple more things to go through. The pivot is specifically for you are talking to someone who may not necessarily have the same goals as you. And you're trying to get a very specific point across, right? You've got your messaging down. You know what you need to say, but that reporter is just asking you completely different questions. They're not asking like, what is an action I can take? They're asking, how did you travel to DC and is this the first time you've been here? And a bunch of people, and I've seen this happen over and over, and it's happened to me. I've thought, okay, well, I'll just get through and answer their questions. And then when I'm done answering their questions, then I'll have a chance to just speak my piece, right? No, at that point, they'll just turn off the camera and walk away. They'll, just like show whatever part of that they're going to show. So what I do and have urged other advocates to do if you are, like if whoever is trying to steer you in the wrong direction away from your messaging, just give a really short, non-interesting answer to the initial question, or just don't answer it at all. Ignore it, and you can just pivot and say, you know what, actually, what's really important about the issue is, or what I actually really want to talk to everybody about is, and just hit them with your talking points. If you just say what you're here to say, regardless of what their question is, then that is the piece of the interview. Like that is what they are going to have to show, right? So always, that's interesting, but actually what I'm here to talk about is just, and it sounds so like rude, right? Like you wouldn't do that in conversation. If someone asks you a question, just ignore their question and be like, and we want to talk that way when we're speaking with legislators or reporters, but it's a completely different arena where we have a very short amount of time to get our point across, and they have a very limited like attention span. So just say what you're there to say. And then another thing I wanted to touch on is trauma porn and how harmful it can be. A lot of times for folks who have, personal experience with, the issues that our communities do, you're gonna be talking about your past trauma, about really difficult personal things that you've gone through. And there is a sort of white saviorism like flavor of reporting or talking to advocates that is very much about just being like, wow, I feel so sorry for these poor people, these poor marginalized people. And I am so thankful for my privilege. And now I'm done listening to that and I'm done, right? Like that's it. Um, they can feel better like, wow, I know so much about this issue now that is really important. It's really affecting all these people. And I don't have to do anything about it. And I know I have the privilege to just like walk away. This happens so often. It tends to get a lot of clicks, a lot of reads. The sadder it is, like the more, you know, propaganda-y it will get. But you're not in those stories, you're not being connected with like you connecting your experiences with systemic problems, right? You're just talking on the surface level about like, this is a sad thing that happened to me. Not this is a sad thing that happened to me because of the systemic injustice that we need to address, and this is what we need to do to address it. And then you want to emphasize, yes, I've gone through this hard thing, but look at me here, like advocating for change because I have taken charge of, what has happened in my life. I am here, trying to fight for liberation for all people on this platform, right? Like it's about resilience and strength. It's not just about the trauma, but what that trauma has transformed into, right? And definitely you want to give solutions and demand action. If that story is not doing that, then it's trauma porn. It might be trauma porn. So I'm going to give you a teeny tiny little homework assignment. Um, which is just like go talk to someone that you trust, your partner, your neighbor, your best friend, your kid, whoever. And just practice your story, practice building in those elements, time it, and then see if you can tell your story with your ask at different lengths. So be like, okay, if I have 5 minutes to talk, what does this sound like? If I have 1 minute to talk and I'm in the elevator with someone, what does this sound like? And then ask your partner for feedback. Ask them, what did they hear? Have them repeat it back to you. Ask them, what did it make them want to do? And how did it make them feel? And I promise you, all of those answers are going to come in really handy, so you can understand how your story is resonating with other people. And I'm sorry, I like probably ran super long, Maya.
No, no worries at all. We still have about 5 minutes for any questions that folks have. You can feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand.
I do see Shakina in the chat. Can trauma porn be used in a way to counter the narrative to share solutions? I think if we see like that's tricky. That's tricky because if you see a piece of reporting or media that is being done in this way, we don't necessarily want to like share that, bring more attention to it, and like give more work and more clicks to folks who are reporting that way. But I think we can use those things kind of among ourselves in training to recognize, you know what, this story is actually missing the component of action and change and strength and resilience. And it's just focusing on the trauma. Um, yeah, yeah, it's really, really exploitative. I hope that answered. And also, I will say, I will drop my email in the chat. If any of y'all have any questions, if you ever want to practice with me, if you ever have something coming up and you want to just talk about it, shoot me an email. We can hop on a Zoom call.
Victoria, I got a direct message from Nikayla that said, can we define what trauma porn is or give an example of what that might be?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'll give an example. I had very early in my communications career, I had a very major magazine reach out to want to do a feature on a an immigrant that had a kid in the United States. And this was back when we were fighting for DAPA, so for parents of Americans to be able to get their status fixed. And so they were really just I thought this is huge. We're going to get so much awareness, exposure. She's going to be able to tell her story. This is wonderful. A reporter basically spent the entire time just being like, okay, tell me more about the bleached bones you encountered in the desert on your way over. Tell me about your daughter's face when you told her that at any minute ICE could come and get mom and dad. And you start to see this is not somebody who wants to get the story told. This is somebody who is exploiting someone's pain to make some absurd narrative that they think in their mind is really gonna sell magazines. It's not actually telling anything about what this woman is doing, getting her kids involved in going to marches with thousands of other people and getting them to the point where they're, speaking at a podium in front of the Supreme Court when they're 12 years old. They're not talking about that. They're not asking about that. They're not saying hey, what's something that people can do? It's just bringing out the most traumatic parts just for that, let's sit and eat popcorn about it. For nothing other than, gosh, those poor people. Those poor people. Let's play and do nothing.
Can I piggyback on that really quick? I know that we're wrapping up, but I think within our communities and within our movement, it is really important that we also exercise the muscle of telling the stories in the way that we want them told and that we want reflected. One of the things that we've seen in pop culture, right? It's why true crime podcasts are so popular, is that it is attractive to kind of traffic in these stories for a lot of reasons for folks. I think it's so important for us as we're thinking about storytelling to really exercise that we have to focus on the pieces of the story that we think are the most important that don't do that. Because I think that's where the opportunity is, and that's how the narratives get shifted. When we talk about bad narratives create bad policies as an organization with CNP, it's because of all of these things, like all of the trauma porn that we get dumped. I literally don't watch the local news anymore for this reason. I choose to actually read it because it's easier for me to digest and make choices about what's happening in the community from it, just because I know what the local news is going to do, right? So I agree with everything Victoria just said. And I would say it's really important for us to also practice telling our stories in a way that doesn't do that and traffic in that type of storytelling.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much to Johnnie and Victoria for presenting. Y'all did an amazing job, as evidenced by everyone in the chat. And take a look, Victoria put her email in the chat for folks that want to follow up with her. But thank you for being here. Our next web session that is going to be open to the public will actually be our fellow graduation. So I'll send out information about that a little closer to the day. Fellows will be sharing the things that they did for their practicum projects. And for fellows and advocates, we will have a closed web session next month, which I will also provide an email follow-up. But thanks y'all for being here.